Good morning, everyone. If you're wondering why I've brought you all together here today, is that today, Saturday, February the 3rd, groups of people are rallying across the province of Alberta for the protection of queer people's rights, and more specifically, trans rights in schools. Today's going to be a little bit different. Normally, I'm here bringing you that camp, drag, realness, standing in front of large things, but that is not the vibe today. And as I was thinking about making this video, I was wondering, does it match with my content? Will it alienate people? And you know what? I am completely fine alienating myself from people who would not like to engage with me based off of what I am about to say here today. So you better be ready, dolls, because this is about to become a social media takeover here for me, in that we are going to talk about Danielle Smith together here. So on the agenda today, we are going to answer the question, is Danielle Smith transphobic? We're going to look at these new policies that are being put forth in our province of Alberta. We are going to look at some reactions to them, and we're just going to really try and get to the heart of the issue here. I would like to provide to you a little bit of armor as well as you proceed as queer people going through the rest of your lives here, not just for today. If you are somebody that is going out to a rally, if you live in Calgary, the rally is at the City Hall building from 2 to 4 p.m. You can bring signs. So before we get to this video and before we start commenting on the policies that are being brought forth against trans youth by our Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, I really need you to understand something. Now, there's a chance that if you've made it this far into this video, you are probably a proponent of queer rights and somebody who is concerned for trans youth under these new policies. But if by chance you are not that person, if you are one of those people that actually agrees with Danielle Smith and you're watching this and you're still here, I do want to say that you are welcome here. My segue here is that it is easy to get caught up in anger when things like this are happening, and especially when you identify with them at a personal level. As I watch these videos, it would be really easy to make those low blows. I could talk about Danielle Smith's appearance and make fun of her that way. If she's stuttering, we could make jokes, and we see this all the time, right? And this can happen especially online. We're not out here to attack people's character. We are not here to be rude on purpose. We are not here to be profane. I am not going to swear in this video. I'm not going to be yelling or come off as extremely angry. Deep down inside, I am very angry about this bill because I do think it is transphobic. But I do not want to eliminate those people who are watching this video, and maybe you're actually willing to listen to what I have to say. So we're gonna be open. We are going to give credit where credit is due, because I'm sure there's credit to give somewhere. I haven't necessarily found it yet, but should we come upon it, I will give it. But everything else, we're going to be calm, collected, cool, and respectful here, because that is how you make a difference. If you are outlandish and you're yelling and you're attacking things that have nothing to do with the actual issue, you're just distracting from the message you are trying to uphold. So we're not going to be doing that here today. So we're going to start out here by the initial address by Danielle Smith. This came out less than a week ago, and it was the first kind of publication about what would be happening in the coming week. All right, so we're going to watch this, and then we're going to talk about it.
Today I wish to address a very sensitive issue involving our children and gender identity. This is not always an easy conversation to have. I strongly believe that we as a society must support and reach out with kindness and inclusion to those who identify as transgender and work to eliminate the discrimination they often experience in their lives. As Premier of this province, I want every Albertan that identifies as transgender to know I care deeply about you and I accept you as you are. As long as I leave this province,
I'm really trying not to pause every 4 seconds and really go in at like a micro level and attack everything that's being said here, but that's not the goal. So I don't want you to think that if I'm letting this play, I just agree with what was just said, because I don't. And as we continue, we're going to stop and kind of come back with these overarching concepts that'll blow most of this out of the water. There is one thing I would like to draw your attention to, though, and take it for what it's worth. It is quite literally my hypothesis. There is a theory in deception detection, in that if somebody is stating something to you as affirmative and they are shaking their head no while they're saying it, it is likely to be deceptive. So I want you to look at Danielle Smith's body language as she says, "I deeply care about you."
As Premier of this province, I want every Albertan that identifies as transgender to know I care deeply about you and I accept you as you are. As long as I leave this province, I will ensure you are supported and your rights are protected. In the case of children aged 17 and under who identify as transgender, I also want you to know that you are loved and supported as you work through your often changing emotions, feelings, and beliefs.
Often changing emotions and beliefs. So remember, pin that, right? Often changing. We're just going to write that down and put a check mark by it. Because I do believe throughout this video, there's a growing narrative that whoever wrote this speech or Danielle Smith herself is trying to build for people that might not necessarily have experience with trans people in their lives.
As we all know, children and teenagers are in a constant state of biological, social, emotional, and sexual development and change.
As are adults, not just children.
They're constantly learning about themselves.
This is the third time now that we've referenced things as being dynamic.
New things, dealing with biological changes, and trying to understand a wide range of new thoughts and feelings. It's a very complicated time. In my view, one of the greatest responsibilities we as parents, teachers, and community leaders have is to preserve for our children the right to grow and develop into mature adults so that they are better prepared to make the most impact.
Preserving. What exactly are we preserving here? Are we preserving this colonial sense of the gender binary? Are we preserving this right-wing ideal that what gender you are assigned at birth is what you should live as for the entirety of your life? Sometimes with things like this, you can look at it and think, what is this preservation leading to? And what interest does this person have in doing these things? It's often not the issues at hand that people are actually working towards. This could also be seen as a distraction tactic because while all of the language in this video seems nice and light, served to you in like a steaming hot cup of tea, and it's just delicate and all the words are so meticulously chosen in order to convey a certain ideal, one must ask themselves, where is this leading? Even if you are somebody that doesn't think that these new policies are harmful, there are a few policies in here that I don't believe will harm as many as some policies in this do. Like there is a severity of what is being proposed here. Maybe not even proposed, implemented. There is a severity here. And there are 2 or 3 that I do believe will hurt an incredible amount of children in the province of Alberta. And then there are some that may not harm any. It's impossible to know all of the effects of things like this because no one person is everywhere. Because you might think it's small and somewhat insignificant now, but what happens in a year? If we are heading in this direction by slow, it's like playing a game of Risk, right? If you're just slowly taking those little pieces and making a bigger pile, but you're only taking 2 at a time to not make it seem like it has a big impact, you can turn around and there's a huge army standing behind you.
They're better prepared to make the most impactful decisions affecting their lives. Decisions like choosing a career, a partner, raising children, their interaction with drugs like alcohol and cannabis.
I fully don't believe that being trans and embracing your transness is not in the same category of these things as like choosing a partner and interacting with alcohol and drugs. Can't really put those things into the same categories because making the choice to interact with alcohol and drugs is not the same thing as being trans and attempting to transition. There's false equivalencies here.
Sexual activities and preferences, and many other adult choices.
Adult choices. Gender identity is not an adult choice. Gender identity is not an adult choice. It's actually incredibly harmful to make gender identity an adult choice because when you get out of that little box that you've been shoved into for your entire life, if you don't identify with what you've been forced to conform to, congratulations. You get to spend the next 10 years of your life figuring out yourself and figuring out your gender. That is an incredible disadvantage to anybody who is trans or gender nonconforming, myself included, because I was suppressed in places like this. And you just follow that down the track, right? Because now these people are at a disadvantage in all of their careers because they have this huge looming task of figuring out who they are as they're entering the professional workforce. Then you have less queer people in positions of power, and it just trickles down into the world all becoming heteronormative.
It is my view that list of adult choices includes deciding whether or not to alter one's biological sex.
Again, I can say here that altering one's biological sex is something that needs to be, I do believe, regulated in some way. And it already was. It already was. You could not waltz in anywhere and have top or bottom surgery. In every case, not just in our province, but around our whole entire country, if you're somebody who's not aware of this process, there is typically an involvement of many professionals as you pursue any kind of gender altering surgery or gender affirmative care. There usually is the presence of a psychologist who you have to prove that you're trans to, And then there's definitely going to be the presence of a doctor and maybe even a third person who would be doing that surgery for you to alter your biological sex. I don't want to speak in absolutes because you can't really assign one label to everything, and I can't group every human's experience into one sentence. I think you would be hard pressed to find an individual who just jumped through all of those existing hoops before all of these policies were brought forth on a whim and then now regrets their choice. This is that conversation again too, right? Of people detransitioning and some people having the understanding that being trans is only temporary and that eventually you will want to go back to your assigned gender and that you'll have regrets now because you've had this surgery. A problem with this is that many people on social media have been platformed as detransitioners by a lot of right-wing media, so then their presence in the world seems stronger. There are so few people who detransition after having altered their biological sex. The ones that do exist out in the world, if they're platformed and they have a bigger presence, then they almost seem like the majority instead of the minority. If there was actual scientific research done into this to travel a group of trans folks across their entire life to actually see the percentage of people who detransition in that, in order to accurately make claims like most people who transition want to detransition at some point, you would actually have to have that scientific data, and you would have to have access to a group of people who have aged through their entire lives of being a trans person or a gender nonconforming person. That in this present day would be incredibly difficult because the amount of trans folks in our world is lessened every day by policies like this. You don't have access to a large control group of elderly trans folks because they have been through systems like this that repress them. There are so many trans folk, both elderly and not, that do not exist with us on this planet anymore because of the pressures that trans people go through on a regular basis that is outside of the governmental process. We're only a minute and 35 seconds in.
Making permanent and irreversible decisions regarding one's biological sex while still a youth can severely limit that child's choices in the future. Prematurely encouraging or enabling children.
I don't know of a single person who is encouraging kids to be trans. Like, in the way that this is worded too, prematurely encouraging could allude to the fact that there is a time that you can encourage children to be trans, but only when they're mature. It's like this looming choice, like smoking cigarettes, that's being pushed upon you by some group of people when it's not that. Being trans is not outside in from external forces. Being trans is from the inside out. And policies like this are making it harder for that inside nature to come out. It's the repression of a whole group of people who are already suffering. Nobody is sitting down encouraging people to be trans. We are sitting down with children, encouraging them to be themselves. Nobody is saying that you need to have top or bottom surgery. I never, in my years of working with children, was encouraging transness. What I was encouraging in children was them following their interests. A lot of people conflate the idea of sexual orientation and gender identity when they are in fact not the same thing. Gender identity is the way that you feel on the inside and or the way that you express yourself out in the world. And these can be categorized into two false binaries of masculinity, femininity, or like most people, some mix of them all together. I would encourage you to learn about other cultures and the way that they value people who exist outside of that gender binary system. There is, of course, the presence of non-binary people. Who don't necessarily feel like they fit completely within the label of man or woman, and they can oscillate between masculinity and femininity, or there can be a predominance with one of the expressions than the other. It can be malleable over time and all of this. And then, of course, sexual identity is a completely and sometimes almost unrelated concept of who you feel a sexual attraction to. Both male, female, masculinity, femininity, non-binary, two-spirit, and everybody in between. Sexual orientation is indeed an adult issue. What I cannot attend to is this idea that you cannot explore gender expression with children. A huge part of learning is playing around. A huge part of learning is playing with every crayon in the crayon box. You know how limiting it is to be assigned as male and then only be afforded to have interest in masculine activities? Yeah, I do. It's brutal. Nobody is encouraging children to be trans. What we are doing is encouraging children to be authentic and just be themselves. And if that means one day they go against the gender binary, awesome. If the next day they go back, awesome. If they stay there, awesome. It doesn't matter. This is building a narrative of inherent anti-transness that is slowly building a mountain of segregation so that when we're at the last step from the top and we are making being trans illegal or something, I don't mean to sound dramatic or hyperbolic, but where else are we going with this other than in that direction?
Or enabling children to alter their very biology or natural growth, no matter how well-intentioned and sincere, poses a risk to that child's future that I, as Premier, am not comfortable with permitting it.
Poses a risk to that child's future. We're kind of conflating two things here, right? Because if we're talking about the amount of harm done to each individual child on either sides of this equation, I do believe that if a child prematurely transitioned and then regretted that surgery, I do believe it could have a larger impact on that child than if they lived in gender dysphoria for the amount of years until they were able to access that care. As a one-to-one child comparison, I do think that it could be argued that the person who regretted their surgery might be more negatively affected than the child who wasn't able to have that surgery. The amount of children on both sides of the equation are not equal. There are so many more trans people that don't regret their surgery. Again, it's that detransitioning conversation that this is happening to all of these people, and it's just not. I don't know anybody in my life who has detransitioned. If you're here and you want to share your story in the comments, please go for it. I'd be willing to talk to you. But I do believe there are so many more trans children who are seeking gender affirmative care who will not regret it. Most won't.
Similarly, the risks and unfair advantages that young women and girls are experiencing when competing with biologically stronger
This right here, I do believe, is a nail in the coffin of confirming some transphobic ideals here. Because claiming that we need to segregate trans women and cis women in sporting competitions, it's transphobic. It's the exclusion of that group of people from something. I want to be succinct about this because I think it's garbage and I want to throw it out in just a few short sentences. Now, first of all, I don't think it's that serious. I think you would be hard-pressed yet again to find a cis female who felt like they were at a disadvantage because of a trans woman on their team or on an opposing team. I don't think the number of trans women in sports is large enough for you to be able to institute policies like this. I don't think it's that serious. I don't think there's a large group of people out there. I don't think there's a lot of cis women who feel like they're at a disadvantage. I really don't know where the sports conversation is coming to. And to say that all trans women are stronger than cis women, I think is a sweeping generalization that cannot be backed up scientifically, because it's just, so those of you who know me in real life know this, but I, in fact, am a teacher and I have worked as a teacher. I am currently working on my Master's of Education right now with a specialization in neuroscience. And you best believe that I've studied a bit of this. And what I'm about to share with you right now is a little bit of research that I've come upon that directly, so I think a big mistake that a lot of anti-trans folks make when they are supporting conversations like this, saying that trans women should not be allowed with cis women in sports because of that disadvantage. I think the idea here is that if you were assigned male at birth, they perceive you as being stronger. And a lot of people really harp on these biological things, right? Saying that if you were assigned male at birth, you are inherently stronger and you're at an advantage over everybody else who was not assigned male at birth. And that's that conversation here of trans women and cis women competing together here in sport. What is conflated here is that it is not the physical makeup of your body. It is the presence of hormones. A masculinized brain is a brain that has more access to testosterone. A feminized brain is a brain that has access to more estrogen. So if you are taking estrogen as a trans woman, or if you are taking testosterone as a trans man, you are effectively masculinizing your brain and body, or feminizing your brain and your body. The way she's explaining this, I'm picturing some big cis man bodybuilder in a wig that like runs onto women's soccer and he's like body checking them off and like hurting them all. That's not what's happening. If there are trans women in sports, would you even notice? But then that also leads to it too. So now people in sporting events, if you're attempting to enter some competitive sport, are you going to have to be able to prove your gender? That's going to be part of your disclosure now. You have to say that you are in fact trans. There are so many more people in the world that are trans that you don't know, and gender nonconforming people that you are just not aware of because it doesn't matter to you, and ultimately it's none of your business. The structure of your brain is not static. The presence of sex hormones on the brain creates many structural and functional differences. This right here is inherently transphobic. Here right now, green check mark, we can check it off. Danielle Smith is in fact transphobic. Next.
Gender females in sporting competitions have also grown too high. After much discussion.
What does too high mean? Show us the numbers. Where's the study? How many are there? Where's the testimonials? Where are the AFAB women out here who are hurt because of this? Publicize them. Let me hear their stories, because I don't think there's that many.
After much discussion, the government caucus and I have therefore decided to implement the following policies and guidelines
Here we go.
as it relates to transgender minors and athletes, including additional supports to assist transgender adults to secure the healthcare they need and the counseling support for youth identifying as transgender to ensure they can successfully work their way through their complex feelings and emotions as they grow to adulthood. First, on the issue of gender reassignment treatments for minors. For minors age 17 and under, top and bottom gender reassignment surgeries will not be permitted.
Okay, so for minors aged 17 and under, top and bottom surgeries will not be permitted. This is one of those pieces that I don't think this necessarily impacts a large amount of trans folk out there in the world. There are policies in place that make these services both hard to access and difficult, but also have a lot of hoops to jump through. And the likelihood that a minor would have been able to do all of those procedural things in order to access top and bottom surgery under the age of 17 is just, it's unlikely. But of course, there would be minors under the age of 17 who would have had top and bottom surgery. I do believe that's happened. I don't believe it's necessarily harmful.
For children age 15 and under, puberty blockers and hormone therapies for the purpose of gender reassignment or affirmation.
Because if you were somebody who attempted to transition before puberty and blocked your puberty, you would be left in a situation and potentially left in a body that does feel more at home and closer to your true identity. Again, I don't know if there's that many children under the age of 15 who have been prescribed puberty blockers. I don't know of any of them. I have known and worked with many trans kids, and I didn't know any of them who were on puberty blockers. It's just my experience. I don't think the numbers were that big. Again, it is just in a collection of transphobia, though. This one may impact less people, but it's still discriminatory.
Also not be permitted, with the exception of those who have already commenced their treatment at this time. Minors age 16 and 17 will be permitted to commence hormone therapies for gender reassignment and affirmation purposes, so long as they are deemed mature enough to make these decisions and have parental, physician, and psychologist approval. For transgender adults, our government is currently working to attract one or more medical...
Did you hear that? One or more. It kind of goes against this idea that there's all these children who are transitioning and there's all these trans athletes who are dominating the sports sphere. But yet you can solve this problem of transgender care in your province by hiring one doctor. One doctor would be able to solve all of this for you. That must mean that there's not that many trans folk playing these roles that you're painting them out to be right now.
Professionals to practice in Alberta who specialize in transgender surgery to ensure those individuals transitioning have access to an expert in Alberta to assist them with their extremely unique and complex medical needs.
Extremely unique and complex. Again, we're building this narrative that everything's so complicated and unique. Trans folks aren't that unique. Most trans folks that I know, them being trans is probably the least interesting thing about them. They're not that extremely unique. Complex? Perhaps. Unique? No. And if they are that unique to you, you got to get out more, girl. I said before I was going to give credit where credit was due. Bringing a healthcare practitioner to the province of Alberta specialized in transgender care is good. That's good, I think.
Rather than going to Quebec, which is now the practice. We will also be building a private registry of medical professionals who specialize in this field to better support the lifelong healthcare needs of transgender Albertans, including access to needed hormones and surgery aftercare. When it comes to classroom instruction on subject matter involving gender identity, sexual orientation...
So here's where I feel particularly positioned to comment on this. Because for those of you who don't know me, I, in fact, am a teacher. I have a Bachelor of Education. I also have a Bachelor of Fine Arts and Drama. I know you can't tell. And like I mentioned before, I'm currently working on my Master's of Education. Now, this this here is where things get messy. So we're going to talk about sexual orientation and human sexuality in classrooms now.
In sexuality, we will be requiring parental notification and an opt-in requirement for each instance a teacher intends to give formal instruction on these subjects.
So parental notification and an opt-in requirement is kind of that two-way communication. You can't just send a letter home to the parents and say, hi, we're doing this, send a note back. If you don't want it to happen, you have to let them know, and they also have to communicate back to you that they are in fact okay with what you are proposing you want to teach to them. I can agree with parents needing to opt in into anything that has to do with sexual orientation because presumably you are teaching them at home. I can agree with that based on my perception of the world being a place where both queer identities and their heteronormative counterpart identities being upheld to the same amount of visibility. If queer people can just exist in schools and be themselves like me without having to be labeled as that and being talked about, I think it's okay to not have sexual orientation education be required in schools. Visibility is incredibly important. So if you have experience with queer people in your life, I don't think that sexual orientation education needs to be mandated in that way in a world where everybody's upheld to the same amount of visibility. But that in fact is not the case in how this happens in classrooms, because I have been a queer person in a school and I am labeled immediately. I wasn't allowed to coexist with my peers at the same level of community perception. Let's say, because I was queer, I was labeled as this. I've been labeled as gay by everybody in my life for the longest because I was an overly feminine person. I was shoved into that box yet again from within my own community almost to fit into this little box of queerness that could be nicely labeled as gay, when that in fact is not the case. But this isn't about me, and that's honestly none of your business. Really, our entire world is built from the gender binary. So if you need an opt-in requirement from talking about anything gender identity related, like how does a kindergarten class get on? How does any elementary class get on without talking about ideas of gender? It comes up all the time. It's just harmful, and it puts more red tape on teachers who are already exhausted and burnt out. It hurts queer children again because they're not going to be able to see their representation in schools, which means that they'll be shoved into that box with the lights off. So then when they turn 18 again, they don't know what to do with themselves, like I mentioned before. It's just, there are huge community implications that stem across generations with things like this.
Instance, a teacher intends to give formal instruction on these subjects. Furthermore, all third-party resource materials or presentations related to gender identity, sexual orientation, or human sexuality in our K-12 school system will need to be pre-approved by the Ministry of Education to ensure the materials are age-appropriate. For a minor, age 15 and under, the government will require parental notification and consent for a school to alter the name or pronouns of a child.
This right here is probably the worst part of this policy. So let's say you have a class and you have a child who is assigned female at birth, but they present in quite a masculine way. And then one day you notice that their friends are using he, him pronouns. If that was me in that situation, let me tell you what I would do. It would be maybe a moment where like the class is being loud and I'm just talking to that one student and nobody else can hear, and I'll just refer to them as he, him, and see the look on their face. Gender euphoria or gender dysphoria, it's quite easy to see. And if I could tell that that child actually wanted to be referred to as he, him, done. That's literally it. I couldn't do that anymore. Because if this child was under the age of 15, I now have to phone home. So you might be thinking, David, that's not bad. Parents should know this. Yeah, I agree. I agree that most parents should know that. However, if you're not tuned into your child enough to know that they might be attempting to use a different pronoun at school, you're not doing your child a good service now, are you? If you're in a situation where you feel like your child is afraid to share something with you that is this meaningful to them, that you end up having to hear it by the classroom teacher, there's a link missing in that communication chain between you and your child. And that is probably alluding to other issues extended outside of their pronoun use at school. Now let's build a situation here where a child is actually not telling their parents on purpose for fear of their safety, which is a real situation that does happen. If transphobia exists at the top of our governmental structure, transphobia can obviously exist among the parents of students whom we serve. What do? You're on the phone with this parent, and now this parent is like shocked and angry. Awesome, now we're gonna send this kid home into an ambush. Outside of my years of formal teaching in the province of Alberta, I've run drama camps for almost a decade, and I've worked with so many different children. And naturally, the ones who might self-select for a drama program would be the queer children as well. And I can't tell you the amount of times, well, I can, probably about 10 or 11 kids throughout the years who have come to camp and just tried on a different pronoun just for fun. Let's see how sir, or let's see how he, him sounds on me today. Let's see how they, them sounds on me today. A big part of childhood is this exploration with different things to see where you feel like you most fit. If you're just trying out a different pronoun use, that can also create a really uncomfortable conversation between parents and students. It's not always, it doesn't have to be uncomfortable or unsafe, but there are situations where that child's safety would then be threatened with their parents knowing that information. Because what ends up happening here, let's follow this track all the way to the end, because if a teacher knows that if they made this phone call home, it would put their students in danger, it would not surprise me if those teachers did not make those phone calls exclusive to the situations where they knew that that student's safety would be threatened. Is it the right thing to do from a lawful perspective? No, it's not. From a moral perspective, yes, it is. So then you're putting these teachers in this really tight position now where they can have consequences for doing what they believe is right. And I think that's really harmful. It's like the nickname thing too, right? If somebody in your class is named Alexandria, but now they want to go by Alex, does that need consent? Nicknames happen all the time.
For 16 and 17-year-olds who choose to alter their name or pronouns, parents do not need to give consent, but they must be notified. We know that nearly all parents, even those who may disagree with the decision of their children, will love and care for their children no matter what choices they make.
Realistically speaking, how do you know that? How do you know that most parents are going to be welcoming to their kids? You don't actually know that. I'd love to see the data you have to support that. And again, choices. Gender identity is not necessarily a choice. Acting on that gender identity is a choice. Acting in ways that which correlate with your gender identity can be a choice. But your actual true gender identity that lays within the core of who you are as an individual is not a choice.
However, in the handful of rare situations where one or both of the parents reject or become abusive to a child who identifies as transgender, we have child protection laws that will be strictly enforced.
It's really sad that she just stood there and said, I know that some children are going to be put in harm's way, but if they are, just call the police. That's going to make this better. Call Child Protective Services, that's going to make this better. Pull that child out of that home potentially into foster care. Like what? In all of those situations, that's not getting better for that child. You're putting out a fire that you started by saying this.
Pilot project to provide appropriate counseling services to support parents and youth identifying as transgender to work through the unique challenges that these families face.
How is that not a thing already? Counseling service for trans people. How is that not already in existence?
We encourage all teachers, parents, classmates, and youth volunteers to be on the watch for any instances of bullying of youth or children for any reason, so adults can assist with putting a stop to it the moment it is detected.
It's very simplistic language here, right? You just make sure you just watch and make sure there's no bullying going on, as if the adults have the power to stop the bullying that goes on in the room, because bullying can happen with adults right there. Bullying can be verbal, nonverbal. Bullying can be so subtle. Bullying can be so much more complex than how this is stated here. It's not just a make sure you tell someone and that teacher's going to march over and just put an end to everything. It's just going to fix it all. It doesn't work like that. It does not work like that, because these parents and students might be bullying these queer folks, these queer kids, because of policies like this that signify that from the top down, we do believe that these trans folks are others. They're othered. That's the narrative this is building here, and that's why it's terrifying that it's heading in this direction.
Our government also needs to deal with the emerging issue of the unfair disadvantages that young women and girls are experiencing when competing with biologically stronger transgender female athletes in sporting competitions. I strongly believe that those who were born male but have transitioned to or identify as female are owed the opportunity to meaningfully participate in sport.
Yeah, they can participate in sport, but we're still going to segregate them because trans people are still othered. The other part of this conversation too is, why are we only talking about trans women? Why aren't we talking about trans men in sports? Oh, because they have a disadvantage, so we don't need to help them? Because if she fully believed what she's saying here, she would be then turning around and giving advantages to trans men in sports, because by this comparison, if trans women are biologically stronger, trans men must be biologically weaker. So what advantages are we giving to trans men in sports? But it's only a problem when queer people have the advantage. It's not even an advantage, but whatever.
However, there are obvious biological realities that give transgender female athletes a massive competitive advantage over
It's not massive.
women and girls. It is not beneficial for those women, including those who are transgender, for this divisive and sometimes dangerous situation to continue.
Again, she's talking about the safety as if these trans women are just body checking all of these cis women into oblivion. It's just not the case.
That is why the Alberta government will work with sporting organizations active in our province.
That makes me sick too, is because all of these sporting organizations are now either voluntarily cooperating with Danielle Smith and the Alberta government, or they're being forced upon by Danielle Smith and the Alberta government. I hope they are being forced on, and that there isn't a whole sense of people in sports who are just transphobic. I have no hand in sports and never have, so I can't really speak on this.
Ensure that women and girls have the choice to compete in a women's only division in athletic
Women's only division? Women's only would include trans women. So again, you're calling them othered. They're others. It's not us. It's them. That us, them, that divisive. It's a slippery road, folks. It's a slippery road.
That is why the Alberta government will work with sporting organizations active in our province to ensure that women and girls have the choice to compete in a women's only division in athletic competitions and are not forced to compete against biologically stronger transgender female athletes.
Biologically stronger transgender female athletes. What a mess of a sentence.
We will also work with those same sporting organizations to ensure transgender athletes are able to meaningfully participate in the sport of their choice through the expansion of co-ed or other gender-neutral divisions for athletic competitions. I understand how controversial and divisive discussions on topics of sexuality and gender can be, especially when those conversations involve children. I would therefore ask that as we work through implementing these policies, that we, as adults in this province, do all we can to depoliticize the discussion.
Sure, we can depoliticize the conversation, but you are the leader of the political party that is instituting these policies. So how is this not inherently political? Yes, I do think that these conversations need to be had amongst people who disagree about them in respectful ways, but it is political.
Implementing these policies, that we, as adults in this province, do all we can to depoliticize the discussion and focus on the well-being of the children involved, whether they are young people identifying as transgender or who find themselves attracted to those of the same sex, or simply trying to understand the complex and often changing emotions and feelings of being teenagers. They all need our unconditional love and support. And it's to those children and teens that I want to say just how much we love you and support you in becoming the person you want to be. You never have to feel alone or isolated.
Becoming the person you want to be, not the person that you are. There is very clear language here that being trans is a choice. That's what she is selling here, and I'm not buying it.
Do reach out to your parents, family members, teachers, a coach.
But what if your family members, teachers, and coaches are transphobic like you, Danielle Smith? Then where can they go for help? That one doctor?
Or other trusted adults, and ask for support. We, as the adults in your life,
find trusted adults to talk to, but legislation like this narrows the pool of trustworthy adults that trans kids can confide in.
We'll be there for you to make sure you know just how amazing and precious you are. Thank you for listening.
Okay, so that took so much longer than I thought it would. There's one other thing that we're going to look at, because I feel like I've shared my thoughts pretty extensively here on what I believe and what I think and what is harming children. So now we're going to watch this video of our Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, speak about these new policies that are being instituted here in Alberta. Let's see what Danielle Smith's leader has to say.
Canadian parents love their kids, and we want the very best for them, and we want them to be kept safe. LGBT youth across this country are among the most vulnerable to homelessness, to suicide, to a range of things that can harm them.
You know what, I wasn't necessarily going to talk about this because it's not something that I'm really that comfortable with. And I've attempted to tell this story before on a podcast, and I had to stop and edit it all out because I just got really cryy and gushy. But I have worked with a student for maybe about 5 years. I knew this student. They were gender nonconforming, and throughout the years I did see them transition. They were such a beautiful, kind soul, and I loved this child so much. You know, you build relationships with these kids, and especially in a summer camp setting from years over years. And like, I had adults like that when I was a kid, and you just love those people because summer camp is fun. And I provided this child a safe space where they could be themselves. And it wasn't until the 4th year that I had them in my camp that I figured out that they were only genuinely expressing themselves when they were in my summer camps. They weren't like that at home. They went by their feminized name at home. They wore dresses at home. But when they were at camp, he, him, outfits super masculine, and I had no idea that I was providing this space for this child. And on the last day of camp, I remember sitting with the upright piano in the middle of the room, and there was maybe 10 of us in the camp, and it was my last day as a summer camp leader. And I remember sitting down and thinking, I need to sing Born This Way for these kids. I just need to. I'm a singer, I'm a piano player. I love sharing that. We sang a lot together. And before I sent those kids off for another year of school back into the harsh realities of our world, I wanted to sing Born This Way for them. I just remember how moved that student looked, that there was an adult in their life who was clearly surviving, not only surviving, but thriving and succeeding as their authentic queer self. And it was in such a moment that I was so happy to provide that representation to that student and give them a safe space. If that was a K-12 setting in Alberta and I was a teacher who had to phone home for that parent, this child would not have been safe. And there's no way to say this in a way that isn't going to sound shocking. And it was about 6 months after that child passed away. There aren't a lot of things in my life that I have trouble getting over, to be completely honest. I've been through bad relationships and ups and downs and betrayals and this and that. And I've been able to effectively move through all of those. This example still gets me. That child should still be with us today. It's unacceptable that we live in a world that does not prioritize and accept these children for who they are so that they can feel safe. I'm here sitting in front of you recording this video right now because this has such a personal weight to me. And I think part of the problem is for many queer people, or maybe even quiet allies out in the world, is that if you don't know a queer person, if you don't know a trans person in real life, it can be really easy to conflate the idea of their transness versus their humanness. They are a human first and an individual who has feelings and rights. Labeling them as trans, as that is the only thing about them that is notable, is not okay. So yes, queer children, in fact, are some of the most vulnerable groups of children.
We need to be there to defend them. We need to be there to protect them. And I know Canadians across the country are doing just that. It is telling that the week after welcoming far-right American conservative Tucker Carlson to her province to sit with him on stage, Danielle Smith has now moved forward with the most anti-LGBT policies of anywhere in the country. Canadians need to know that the federal government and all Canadians will be there to protect youth. As a federal government, we will always be there to protect the most vulnerable, particularly vulnerable LGBT youth who need to know that there are people across the country there to fight for them. If Premier Smith wants to fight someone, stand with us and fight for Canadians on lower grocery prices, on affordable fuel, on more housing, on fighting climate change. Fight with us to defend the rights of vulnerable Canadians. Don't fight against vulnerable LGBT youth.
Okay, my lovelies, we're going to leave it here. I just felt it was really important to, in fact, show that our leader of our country, Justin Trudeau, does not, in fact, align and agree with these anti-trans policies that are being instituted by our Premier, Danielle Smith. If you've made it this far in the video, I really want to thank you for watching, because sometimes it can be really affirmative to consume content that you identify with and that you agree with. But if you are somebody who made it to the end of this video and you don't agree with me, I do want to thank you and extend that same amount of appreciation for your viewership as much as everybody else, because I fully believe that we do owe respect to everybody. That's why I've sat here and not gone against anybody's appearance or things that are outside of this. I'm actually really proud of myself that I don't think I even swore once, right? You need to be respectful in order to fight for the actual issues at hand. If you're being outlandish and too loud and being distracting, then you're not actually going to shine a spotlight on the issue at hand. You're going to shine a spotlight on whatever behavior you're engaging in that's getting attention. You don't need to be outlandish to get attention. If you are watching this on Saturday, February the 2nd, I would love to invite you to many rallies that are happening across Alberta today. The one in Calgary is from 2 to 4 p.m. at the City Hall building. You can come and bring signs and support your community. But if not, there are so many other ways that you can support the community now and forever. And to be honest, we need you more now than ever. So thank you so much for watching. If you want any more information, this is kind of Calgary specific, but you can go to qcu.yyc on Instagram. It's the Queer Citizens United Instagram page, and they have a lot of information. In times like these, we need to lean on each other and support each other as much as possible. So make sure to drink your water, mind your business, check in on your friends, love everybody, and afford everybody the same opportunities in the world, no matter their gender identity or expression. Trans folk are real and valid. Trans women are women. Trans men are men, and everybody in between is exactly who they want to be. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.